There exists a war that most people never realize they're fighting. It's not waged on battlefields or in boardrooms. It doesn't announce itself with fanfare or drama. This war is fought in the quiet corridors of your mind, in the moments between decisions, in the space where action should live, but hesitation dwells instead. And make no mistake, you are losing this war every single day. The ancient Stoics understood something that modern society has desperately tried to forget, that the greatest obstacles to our success are not external. They are not your competitors, your circumstances, or your lack of resources. The greatest obstacles are silent, invisible forces that operate from within, eroding your potential one day at a time, one decision at a time, one thought at a time. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher-emperor who ruled Rome while simultaneously mastering his own mind, wrote in his private journals that we are our own worst enemies. Not through grand acts of self-destruction, but through subtle patterns of thought and behavior that we've normalized, accepted, and even defended. These patterns have become so familiar that we mistake them for wisdom, for prudence, for realism. But they are none of these things. They are the silent enemies of your success. Throughout this examination, we will not simply identify these enemies. We will dissect them, understand their mechanisms, and arm you with the weapons necessary to defeat them. This is not motivational rhetoric. This is a strategic manual for those who refuse to be casualties in the war against their own potential. What you're about to learn will disturb you, challenge you, and ultimately, if you allow it, liberate you. The first enemy operates with such subtlety that most people never identify it as an enemy at all. They mistake it for strength, for independence, for the mark of someone who cannot be hurt. This enemy is indifference. Indifference is the slow death of ambition disguised as emotional protection. It whispers that caring too much makes you vulnerable, that passion is naive, that enthusiasm is for the young and foolish. And so you learn to shrug, to say it doesn't matter, to pretend that the things you want don't really affect you. This is precisely how dreams die, without the drama of failure. The mechanism here is insidious. When you tell yourself you don't care, you're not protecting yourself from disappointment. You're programming your subconscious to stop seeking opportunities, to stop recognizing chances, to stop mobilizing the energy required for achievement. Your brain, efficient machine that it is, redirects resources away from goals you've labeled as unimportant. Indifference becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Consider the modern professional landscape. How many talented individuals never advance because they've adopted indifference as their armor? They don't apply for the promotion because they tell themselves they don't really want it anyway. They don't pursue the ambitious project because they've convinced themselves that ambition is somehow vulgar. They watch others succeed and tell themselves they never cared about success in the first place. This is not wisdom. This is capitulation, dressed in the language of philosophy. The Stoics practiced detachment from outcomes, yes, but never indifference to action. Marcus Aurelius cared deeply about his duty, about justice, about the welfare of Rome. He simply refused to let the outcomes disturb his inner peace. There is a universe of difference between emotional regulation and emotional nullification. Here is what you must do. Identify one area of your life where you've been practicing indifference. Perhaps it's your health, your relationships, your career trajectory, or your personal development. Acknowledge that beneath that indifference lies fear, fear of trying and failing, fear of wanting something and not getting it. Then make a conscious decision to care again. Set one specific goal in that area and pursue it with deliberate intensity for 30 days, not because success is guaranteed, but because the act of caring and striving is what keeps you alive in the truest sense. Avoid the trap of cynical indifference that masquerades as sophistication in social settings. When someone shares enthusiasm about their goals, resist the urge to respond with detached coolness. Your indifference infects not only your own potential, but the potential of those around you. The second enemy is more obvious but no less devastating. It is indecision, the paralysis that comes not from lack of options, but from an abundance of them. Indecision is the mind's attempt to avoid responsibility for outcomes. If you never decide, you never fail. If you never commit, you never risk being wrong. But here's the brutal truth. Indecision is itself a decision. It's a decision to let circumstances decide for you, to let time make choices on your behalf, to abdicate the very power that separates humans from leaves blowing in the wind. Napoleon understood this principle with crystalline clarity. He famously said that the art of war could be reduced to a single principle: make a decision. Not necessarily the perfect decision, but a decision made with available information and executed with commitment. His genius was not that he never made mistakes. His genius was that he moved while his enemies deliberated. In the modern context, indecision manifests in 1,000 small ways. The entrepreneur who endlessly refines their business plan but never launches. The professional who researches every option but never takes the job. The creative who plans their masterpiece but never starts creating. Each day of indecision is a day your competitors are gaining ground, a day your skills are remaining undeveloped, a day your life is being lived in the conditional tense. The psychology here involves what researchers call analysis paralysis and decision fatigue. Your brain, confronted with multiple options and uncertain outcomes, attempts to gather infinite information to guarantee a perfect choice. But perfect information never arrives. Meanwhile, the energy required to maintain multiple possibilities in suspension drains your mental resources, leaving you exhausted before you've even begun. Social media has amplified this enemy exponentially. You're now exposed to infinite possibilities, infinite paths, infinite versions of success. Every choice becomes loaded with the fear of missing out on some better option you haven't yet discovered. This is a trap designed to keep you scrolling, comparing, and postponing. Here is your counter strategy. Implement the two-option rule. When faced with a decision, narrow it down to two viable options. Give yourself a maximum of 48 hours to choose between them. Make your choice based on which option offers the most learning potential, not which guarantees the best outcome. Then commit fully to that path for a defined period, say 90 days, before re-evaluating. This removes the constant second-guessing that drains your energy and dilutes your efforts. Additionally, practice making small decisions quickly. Where to eat, what to wear, which route to take. These micro-decisions are training grounds for your decision-making muscle. Speed and conviction in small matters build the neural pathways for decisive action in larger matters. The third enemy speaks in your own voice, which makes it the most trusted and therefore the most dangerous. This enemy is doubt. Doubt is different from healthy skepticism. Skepticism questions propositions and demands evidence. Doubt questions your fundamental capacity to achieve, to learn, to become. It's the voice that says, "Who am I to attempt this?" It's the feeling that everyone else has some secret knowledge or inherent capability that you lack. It's the certainty that your success, when it comes, is luck, but your failures are proof of your inadequacy. This enemy has ancient roots. The Buddha spoke of doubt as one of the 5 hindrances to enlightenment, not because questioning is wrong, but because paralyzing self-doubt prevents you from walking any path with commitment. You cannot learn what you're capable of if you never fully test yourself. Modern psychology has named this imposter syndrome, but that clinical term domesticates what is actually a savage and relentless attacker. Doubt doesn't just make you feel bad, it alters your behavior in specific, measurable ways. You over-prepare to compensate for perceived inadequacy. You avoid opportunities where your competence might be tested. You attribute your successes to external factors while internalizing your failures. This creates a distorted feedback loop where no amount of achievement ever builds genuine confidence. Consider how this plays out in professional environments. The talented individual who remains silent in meetings because they doubt the value of their contributions. The capable leader who micromanages because they doubt their team will execute without constant supervision, which itself stems from doubting whether they truly deserve their leadership position. The entrepreneur who prices their services below market value because they doubt anyone would pay what they're actually worth. Doubt is particularly pernicious because it often disguises itself as realism or humility. Society teaches us that confidence is arrogance, that self-belief is delusion. But the truly delusional position is believing that you, uniquely among all humans, lack the capacity to learn, grow, and achieve through persistent effort. Here is what you must understand. Competence is not a prerequisite for starting. Competence is the result of starting, failing, adjusting, and persisting. Every expert you admire was once a beginner who doubted themselves but moved forward anyway. The difference between them and those who never achieved expertise is not the absence of doubt, but the refusal to let doubt determine their actions. Your practical weapon against this enemy is evidence collection. Start a success journal where you document every achievement, no matter how small, every problem you solved, every challenge you overcame, every goal you reached. When doubt whispers that you're not capable, you have concrete evidence to counter it. This is not positive thinking. This is building a factual case against the prosecution. Additionally, reframe doubt as a signal rather than a verdict. When you feel doubt, ask what specific skill or knowledge you're uncertain about. Then acquire that skill or knowledge. Doubt about your public speaking ability? Take a course and practice. Doubt about your technical skills? Dedicate time to learning. Transformed from a vague anxiety into a specific deficiency, doubt becomes a roadmap rather than a roadblock. The fourth enemy is more socially acceptable than the others, which makes it more insidious. This enemy is worry, and the time has come to abandon it completely. Worry is mental rehearsal for disasters that will likely never occur. It's your mind's attempt to control uncertainty by simulating negative outcomes repeatedly. But here's what worry never does. It never prevents the negative outcome, never prepares you to handle it better, and never produces actionable solutions. Worry is fear on a treadmill, burning energy while going nowhere. The Stoics distinguished between what is within your control and what is not. Epictetus taught that we should focus our energy exclusively on the former and accept the latter with equanimity. Worry represents the exact opposite of this wisdom. It pours energy into imagining scenarios you cannot control while draining the energy needed to address what you can control. Neuroscience has revealed why worry is so persistent. Your brain cannot distinguish between a vividly imagined threat and a real one. When you worry about a presentation going badly, your amygdala activates the same stress response as if the presentation were happening now and actually going badly. You experience all the physiological and psychological costs of the feared event without any of the learning or adaptation that comes from actually experiencing it. In contemporary life, worry has become a status symbol of sorts. The busy professional who worries constantly about deadlines, deliverables, and performance reviews. The parent who worries endlessly about their children's safety, education, and future. Society interprets this worry as evidence of how much you care, how responsible you are, how seriously you take your obligations. But worry is not care. Worry is the refusal to trust your capacity to handle whatever comes. Consider what happens when you chronically worry. Your decision-making deteriorates because you're operating from a state of anxiety rather than clarity. Your relationships suffer because worry makes you either withdrawn or controlling. Your health declines as cortisol floods your system day after day. Your creativity vanishes because the worried mind cannot access the relaxed, associative states where innovation emerges. You sacrifice your present trying to control a future that exists only in your imagination. Here is the liberating truth. 90% of what you worry about never happens, and the 10% that does happen rarely unfolds as you imagined it would. More importantly, you've handled every difficult situation your life has presented so far. You're still here. You adapted, you survived, you learned. Worry added nothing to this process except suffering. Your action plan is this. Implement a worry period. When a worry arises during the day, write it down and schedule it for your designated worry time. Say 15 minutes in the evening. When that time comes, review your list and ask for each item. Is this within my control? If yes, what is one action I can take? If no, practice consciously releasing it. Most worries will seem absurd by the time you review them. Those that remain and are actionable become tasks. Those that remain but are unactionable must be released repeatedly if necessary. Additionally, replace worry with preparation where appropriate. If you're worried about a job interview, don't worry. Research the company, practice your responses, and prepare thoughtful questions. The energy that would have gone into worry now goes into actions that actually improve your outcomes. This is the difference between useless suffering and useful effort. The fifth enemy presents itself as a virtue, which makes it particularly difficult to recognize and resist. This enemy is overcaution, the excessive need to minimize risk at all costs. Overcaution is the disease of the modern comfortable life. When survival is not in question, the mind manufactures threats to justify its ancient vigilance mechanisms. But the threats it manufactures are not tigers in the grass. They're the risk of looking foolish, the risk of losing money, the risk of being rejected, the risk of making the wrong choice. These are not survival threats, yet overcaution treats them as such. The philosopher Seneca observed that we suffer more in imagination than in reality. Overcaution is the institutionalization of this suffering. It's the belief that if you can just identify every possible risk, plan for every contingency, and wait for the perfect moment, you can move through life without ever experiencing failure or loss. This belief is not just false. It's the very thing that guarantees a life unlived. Look at the pattern of overcautious individuals. They extensively research before purchasing even minor items, not because the research provides significant value, but because the act of researching delays the moment of commitment. They seek advice from dozens of people before making decisions, not to gain diverse perspectives, but to diffuse responsibility if things go wrong. They wait for more experience, more resources, more certainty before pursuing their goals, not recognizing that these things come from pursuit, not before it. In business, overcaution manifests as the perfect business plan that never launches, the product that's endlessly refined but never released, the expansion that's perpetually studied but never executed. The market moves, competitors capture opportunities, and the overcautious watch from the sidelines, telling themselves they're being smart and strategic. Meanwhile, those with balanced caution and boldness are learning from real-world feedback, iterating, and building momentum. The psychological mechanism is clear. Overcaution provides the comfort of feeling in control without the vulnerability of real action. You're working on it. You're being responsible. You're thinking it through. These phrases become shields against the accusations of passivity, even when that's exactly what they represent. Overcaution is a sophisticated form of avoidance. Here's what you must accept. Risk cannot be eliminated, only managed. Every significant achievement in your life will require accepting some degree of uncertainty and potential loss. The question is not whether to take risks, but which risks offer asymmetric rewards, where the potential gain vastly outweighs the potential loss. Your practical approach is to implement the premortem and premortem. Before a significant decision, imagine two scenarios. In the premortem, Imagine that your decision led to failure. What went wrong? This helps you identify real risks worth mitigating. In the pre-mortem, imagine that you didn't take the action and 5 years have passed. What opportunities did you miss? What has been the cost of inaction? This helps you see that overcaution has its own severe consequences. Then, employ graduated risk exposure. If you're overcautious about career changes, don't quit your job impulsively. Start a side project. If you're overcautious about investments, don't bet everything on one venture. Start with a small amount you can afford to lose. Overcaution often stems from thinking in absolutes, either complete safety or reckless risk. Reality offers infinite gradations between these extremes. Most importantly, redefine failure. Each failure is data, feedback, education. The only true failure is the failure to extract learning from the experience. When you reframe failure this way, overcaution loses its primary weapon, the fear of getting it wrong. The sixth enemy poisons everything it touches, turning victories into flukes and setbacks into prophecies. This enemy is pessimism, the habit of negative expectation. Pessimism is not realism, though pessimists defend it as such with religious fervor. Realism assesses situations objectively, acknowledging both challenges and opportunities. Pessimism systematically distorts assessment by overweighting negatives and dismissing positives. It's a cognitive bias that masquerades as intelligence. Schopenhauer built an entire philosophy around pessimism, arguing that life is suffering and optimism is delusion. Yet even he lived to 72, continued writing, and sought recognition for his work. His behavior revealed that even philosophical pessimists don't actually believe their own doctrine deeply enough to stop acting as if their actions matter. The insidious nature of pessimism is that it's self-reinforcing. When you expect negative outcomes, you unconsciously sabotage your efforts or fail to recognize positive developments. This creates evidence that your pessimism was justified, which reinforces the pattern. The pessimistic employee who expects to be passed over for promotion stops putting in discretionary effort, ensuring they are indeed passed over. The pessimistic entrepreneur who expects their venture to fail doesn't invest fully in marketing or customer service, guaranteeing poor results. In interpersonal dynamics, pessimism is relationship poison. The pessimistic partner who expects betrayal interprets neutral or positive behaviors through a lens of suspicion, creating conflict and distance until the relationship actually deteriorates. The pessimistic leader who expects their team to underperform creates a culture of low morale and minimal effort, manifesting their expectations into reality. Modern culture has made pessimism fashionable in certain circles. Optimism is mocked as naive, while pessimism is presented as the mark of the sophisticated thinker who sees through pleasant illusions. This is intellectual laziness disguised as profundity. It's far easier to predict negative outcomes since negativity is always possible and can claim vindication whether or not it actually occurs. Here's the framework you need. Reality contains both positive and negative potentials simultaneously. Your expectations don't change reality, but they dramatically change which aspects of reality you notice, how you interpret events, and most critically, which actions you take. Pessimism doesn't protect you from disappointment. It guarantees disappointment by blinding you to opportunities and paralyzing your initiative. The antidote is not toxic positivity or denial of genuine challenges. The antidote is flexible optimism, the stance that assumes you can influence outcomes through your actions, that challenges are solvable with effort and ingenuity, and that setbacks contain lessons rather than verdicts. This is not wishful thinking. This is the only psychological stance compatible with sustained achievement. Practically, implement the 3-to-1 ratio. For every negative possibility you identify, force yourself to identify 3 ways things could go well, or 3 actions you could take to improve the outcome. This retrains your pattern recognition system to scan for opportunities with the same intensity it currently scans for threats. Additionally, conduct an audit of your information diet. Pessimism feeds on negative news, doom scrolling, and communities that bond over shared cynicism. If your daily consumption consists primarily of content about what's wrong, broken, or declining, your worldview will reflect that distorted input. Actively seek balanced sources, solution-focused content, and communities oriented toward building rather than complaining. We have now arrived at the 7th and final enemy, the one that feels most innocent, most justified, most like a natural response to life's difficulties. This enemy is complaining, the chronic verbalization of dissatisfaction without action. Complaining feels productive. It feels like you're addressing problems by talking about them. It creates a sense of camaraderie with fellow complainers. It provides temporary emotional relief. But examine what complaining actually accomplishes. It reinforces your helplessness by repeatedly asserting that external forces control your experience. It repels people who could help you or create opportunities. It trains your brain to scan for problems rather than solutions. It transforms you from an agent who shapes reality into a victim who narrates their suffering. The Stoics were uncompromising on this point. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Accept what comes and complain of nothing." This wasn't about suppressing genuine problems. It was about recognizing that complaining adds suffering to suffering without producing solutions. It's the mental equivalent of picking at a wound, preventing healing while increasing pain. Distinguish between complaining and problem solving. Problem solving identifies an issue and focuses energy on potential solutions, even if those solutions are difficult or uncertain. Complaining identifies an issue and focuses energy on how unfair, frustrating, or hopeless it is. One orientation creates agency, the other creates victimhood. In professional settings, chronic complainers become invisible for advancement regardless of their technical skills. Leaders recognize that complainers drain team energy, spread negativity, and resist solutions because solutions would rob them of their primary form of social interaction. The person who complains about unclear directives but never asks for clarification. The person who complains about insufficient resources but never proposes alternatives. They've made complaining their identity. Social media has industrialized complaining, creating entire communities organized around shared grievances. These communities feel supportive, but they're actually reinforcement chambers for helplessness. Every "you're so right, this is terrible" response confirms that you're justified in feeling bad and that changing your situation is impossible because the problem is systemic, structural, other people's fault. Here's what you must understand about the neuroscience of complaining. Each time you verbalize a complaint, you strengthen the neural pathways associated with problem-focused thinking and emotional distress. Your brain becomes increasingly efficient at generating complaints and increasingly inefficient at generating solutions. This is literal, measurable brain change. You are sculpting your neurology with every complaint. The transformation begins with a simple but difficult commitment, a 30-day complaint-free challenge. Every time you catch yourself about to complain, stop. Instead, either say nothing, identify a potential solution, or express gratitude for something related to the situation. This will be excruciating at first, because you'll realize how much of your self-expression is complaint-based, but persist. When you encounter genuine problems that need addressing, replace the complaint structure with the solution structure. Instead of, "This system is terrible and makes everything harder." Try, "This system has inefficiencies. I'm going to propose these 3 improvements." Instead of, "Nobody appreciates what I do here," try, "I need to communicate my contributions more effectively and ensure they align with organizational priorities." Additionally, distance yourself from chronic complainers. This sounds harsh, but it's necessary. Complaining is contagious. Mirror neurons ensure that when you listen to someone complain, your brain simulates their emotional state. Surround yourself with people oriented toward action, growth, and solution finding. You will become like those you spend time with. We have now mapped the territory of internal warfare. 7 enemies, each operating with different tactics, but serving the same end, keeping you small, keeping you stuck, keeping you from manifesting your potential. Indifference convinces you not to care. Indecision prevents you from committing. Doubt whispers you cannot succeed. Worry drains your energy on imagined disasters. Overcaution paralyzes you with exaggerated risk. Pessimism blinds you to possibility. Complaining transforms you from agent to victim. But understanding enemies is only half the battle. Now we must address the deeper question: why do these enemies exist? What function do they serve? Because nothing persists in human psychology without serving some purpose, even if that purpose is ultimately destructive. Each of these enemies offers a seductive bargain. They promise to protect you from pain, from failure, from disappointment, from judgment. They say, if you don't care, you can't be hurt. If you don't decide, you can't be wrong. If you doubt yourself, you won't be surprised when you fail. If you worry, you're prepared. If you're overcautious, you're safe. If you're pessimistic, you can't be disappointed. If you complain, you're not responsible for change. These are lies, but they are comforting lies. They allow you to remain passive while feeling justified in that passivity. They transform inaction into a form of wisdom. This is why defeating these enemies requires more than intellectual understanding. It requires a fundamental shift in what you value: comfort or growth, safety or achievement, the avoidance of pain or the pursuit of meaning. The ancient philosophers understood this. Aristotle spoke of virtue as the mean between extremes, developed through practice. You cannot think your way to courage. You must act courageously repeatedly until courage becomes your character. The same applies to each enemy we've identified. You cannot think your way out of indifference or worry or pessimism. You must practice their opposites until new patterns become automatic. This is the moment where most people falter. They understand the problem, they agree with the analysis, they genuinely intend to change. But intention without implementation is just another form of self-deception. So we must now address the advanced tactics, the specific practices that transform understanding into transformation. The first advanced tactic is identity architecture. Your actions flow from your identity, from who you believe yourself to be. If you identify as someone who is careful, overcaution will feel natural and appropriate. If you identify as someone who has been hurt and therefore must protect themselves, indifference will feel like wisdom. You must consciously architect a new identity. This begins with language. Stop saying, "I'm not a risk taker," or "I'm just a worrier," or "I've always been pessimistic." These statements are not describing reality. They are creating reality. Replace them with, "I'm developing my capacity for calculated risk. I'm learning to direct my mental energy productively. I'm training myself to see opportunities." These are not affirmations. These are accurate descriptions of someone engaged in the process of change. Support this linguistic shift with behavioral evidence. Take one small action that contradicts your old identity. If you've identified as indecisive, make 3 quick decisions today. If you've identified as pessimistic, identify and verbalize 3 potential positive outcomes for current situations. Your brain believes what you demonstrate through behavior more than what you claim through words. The second advanced tactic is environmental design. Your environment is constantly shaping you, usually without your awareness. Who you spend time with, what you consume, where you work, these factors either reinforce your enemies or support your growth. You must become ruthless about environmental design. Audit your relationships. Identify which people encourage your worst tendencies and which people call forth your best self. The friend who validates all your complaints but never challenges you to act. The colleague who shares your pessimism and confirms that success is impossible. These relationships feel comfortable, but they are anchors. Either transform these relationships by changing how you engage in them or create distance. Seek out people who embody the qualities you're developing. The decisive person, the optimistic realist, the action-oriented problem solver. You don't need to explain what you're doing. Simply spend time in their presence and observe. Mirror neurons will begin subtly adjusting your patterns to match theirs. Audit your information consumption. What are you feeding your mind daily? If it's primarily news about disasters, posts about injustice, content designed to provoke outrage, you are fertilizing your internal enemies. This doesn't mean ignorance of real problems. It means being strategic about what you allow into your consciousness. Seek content that educates, inspires, and equips you with knowledge and skills. Design your physical environment to support your new patterns. If overcaution stems from fear of judgment, create a private space where you can experiment without an audience. If indecision plagues you, reduce options in low-stakes areas of life to preserve mental energy for important decisions. Your environment should make desired behaviors easier and undesired behaviors harder. The third advanced tactic is failure reframing. Every one of these enemies is ultimately rooted in fear of failure and the pain it brings. You will not defeat these enemies until you change your relationship with failure itself. This requires understanding what failure actually is and what it is not. Failure is not a judgment of your worth. It is feedback about the approach you took. Failure is not permanent unless you stop trying. It is temporary unless you make it your identity. Failure is not shameful unless you learn nothing from it. It is only wasteful if you refuse to extract the lesson. Begin documenting your failures with the same attention you might give to successes. Create a failure log where you record what you attempted, what happened, what you learned, and what you'll do differently next time. This transforms failure from an emotional event into an educational one. Over time, you'll notice that your most significant growth often follows your most significant failures. Actively seek small failures. Set goals where failure is likely, even probable, because the attempt itself builds capabilities. Apply for the position you're not quite qualified for. Pitch the idea that might get rejected. Have the difficult conversation that might go badly. Each small failure inoculates you against the fear of larger failures. You discover experientially that failure is survivable, even valuable. The fourth advanced tactic is momentum engineering. Defeating these enemies is not about one dramatic transformation. It's about creating and maintaining momentum in the right direction. Small, consistent actions compound over time into dramatic results, but only if you engineer systems that maintain momentum even when motivation fades. Implement minimum viable actions. These are actions so small that excuses become impossible. Not work out for an hour, but put on workout clothes. Not write a chapter, but write one sentence. Not completely reorganize my life, but make one decision in under 30 seconds. These minimum actions serve two purposes. First, they maintain momentum on difficult days. Second, they often lead to much more once you've started. Create accountability structures. The private internal battle against these enemies is too easily abandoned when no one is watching. Share specific commitments with someone who will follow up. Join or form a group with others working on similar growth. The knowledge that someone will ask about your progress creates a productive pressure that substitutes for motivation on days when it's absent. Track leading indicators, not just outcomes. You cannot always control whether you succeed, but you can control whether you take action despite indecision, whether you engage despite indifference, whether you think in solutions despite the urge to complain. Track these behavioral indicators daily. Celebrate consistency in action, regardless of immediate results. The fifth advanced tactic is philosophical anchoring. When these enemies attack, and they will attack, you need more than tips and techniques. You need a philosophical foundation that provides meaning for the struggle. Why are you fighting these enemies? What are you fighting for? Connect your daily battles to your ultimate values. If you value freedom, recognize that these enemies are forms of imprisonment. Indecision is being imprisoned by paralysis. Worry is being imprisoned by imagined futures. Complaining is being imprisoned by helplessness. Every time you act against these patterns, you are claiming freedom. If you value growth, recognize that comfort and growth cannot coexist. These enemies offer comfort. They offer the comfort of familiar patterns, of avoided risks, of lowered expectations. Growth demands the opposite. Every time you choose action over hesitation, engagement over indifference, you are choosing growth. If you value contribution, recognize that these enemies prevent you from offering your gifts to the world. The book unwritten because of doubt, the business unlaunched because of overcaution, the leadership not provided because of pessimism, these are not just personal losses. They are losses to everyone who would have benefited from your contribution. Write your philosophical anchor. One paragraph that connects defeating these enemies to what you value most deeply. Read it daily. Let it remind you why temporary discomfort is preferable to permanent regret. The final advanced tactic is compassionate vigilance. You are engaged in a long campaign, not a single battle. There will be days when old patterns re-emerge. You will catch yourself complaining, doubting, hesitating. This is not failure. This is the nature of habit change. The key is developing compassionate vigilance, the ability to notice these patterns without judgment while firmly redirecting yourself. When you notice an enemy has gained ground, don't waste energy on self-criticism. That's just another form of complaint, directed inward. Simply acknowledge it. I notice I'm worrying about this presentation. Then redirect. What's one action I can take to better prepare? This gentle but firm redirection, repeated hundreds of times, rewrites your default patterns. Develop a practice of regular reflection. Weekly, review which enemies gained ground and which you successfully countered. What triggered the old patterns? What helped you maintain new ones? This meta-awareness accelerates learning and prevents you from sleepwalking back into old habits. We stand now at the end of this examination, but at the beginning of your true work. Everything shared here is worthless if it remains intellectual entertainment. The philosophers we've referenced did not achieve wisdom by reading about it. They achieved it through daily practice, through consistent application, through refusing to let understanding remain separate from action. You now possess a map of the territory. You understand the 7 silent enemies: indifference, indecision, doubt, worry, overcaution, pessimism, and complaining. You understand their mechanisms, their appeals, their costs. You have been given tactical approaches for defeating each one. You have been given advanced strategies for sustaining that victory over time. But knowledge is not transformation. Reading about defeating these enemies while continuing to harbor them is worse than ignorance, because it adds self-deception to the original problem. You now face a choice, the only choice that truly matters. Will you implement, or will you merely appreciate? The moment you finish hearing these words, the enemies will reassert themselves. Doubt will question whether any of this applies to you. Indecision will paralyze you with questions about where to start. Overcaution will suggest you need more information before acting. Pessimism will predict that you'll fail like you failed before. Complaining will find reasons why this is harder for you than for others. Expect this. This is their final defense. They will attempt to use the information you've just received against you, turning it into another reason for inaction. The decisive moment is the next 60 seconds. What will you do right now? Not tomorrow, not after you think about it more, now. Make one decision you've been postponing. Take one action you've been doubting you could take. Identify one complaint and transform it into a solution-focused statement. These are not grand gestures. They are declarations of war against the forces that have been limiting you. The life you want exists on the other side of these enemies. The career you desire, the relationships you crave, the impact you wish to make, the person you know you could be. All of it requires defeating these internal forces. No external factor, no circumstance, no other person has more influence over your trajectory than your willingness to engage in this internal warfare. Success is not a destination you arrive at. It is a state of being you maintain through daily victories over these silent enemies. Every day you choose action over hesitation is a successful day. Every day you direct your energy toward solutions rather than complaints is a successful day. Every day you care deeply, despite the risk of disappointment, is a successful day. The philosophers, leaders, and achievers we've referenced throughout this examination were not superhuman. They were humans who recognized these same enemies, who struggled against them daily, and who refused to surrender. Their advantage was not talent, circumstances, or luck. Their advantage was the decision to fight the battles that most people don't even recognize are occurring. You are capable of this same transformation, not because you are special, but because you are human, and this capacity exists within human nature when properly directed. The question was never whether you could change. The question was always whether you would choose to change. This is not a motivational speech designed to generate temporary excitement that fades by tomorrow. This is a transmission of strategic knowledge that, if applied, fundamentally alters your trajectory. The difference between those who transform and those who remain stuck is not information. Everyone has access to information. The difference is the willingness to endure the discomfort of new patterns until they become natural. Consider what your life looks like 5 years from now if nothing changes, if indifference continues to protect you from caring deeply, if indecision continues to prevent commitment, if doubt continues to whisper that you're not capable, if worry continues to drain your energy, if overcaution continues to disguise itself as wisdom, if pessimism continues to color every perception, if complaining continues to be your primary response to difficulty. What does that life look like? Now consider the alternative. 5 years of daily victories over these enemies. 5 years of decisive action compounding. 5 years of learning from failures rather than being destroyed by them. 5 years of directing your energy toward solutions. 5 years of calculated risks that sometimes succeed and sometimes teach. 5 years of scanning for opportunities with the same intensity you once scanned for threats. 5 years of taking responsibility for your experience rather than narrating your victimhood. What does that life look like? The gap between these two futures is not dramatic actions. It's daily micro-choices, repeated thousands of times until they become your character. This is simultaneously encouraging and demanding. Encouraging because transformation doesn't require superhuman effort, just consistent human effort. Demanding because there are no shortcuts, no hacks, no ways to avoid the gradual work of rewiring your patterns. Understand something crucial about time. The next 5 years will pass regardless of what you do. You cannot stop time. You cannot pause your life until you feel ready. The only variable you control is who you're becoming during that time. Will you be 5 years older with the same limitations, the same excuses, the same enemies controlling you? Or will you be 5 years more capable, more decisive, more resilient? People often say they'll start making changes when circumstances improve. When they have more time, more money, more support, more certainty. This is the enemies speaking. Circumstances rarely improve on their own. Circumstances improve, when you bring enhanced capabilities to your existing situation. Waiting for better circumstances is waiting forever. The Stoics taught that we don't control what happens to us, but we absolutely control how we respond. Your enemies try to convince you otherwise. They try to convince you that your responses are inevitable, that indecision is reasonable given your circumstances, that worry is appropriate given the uncertainties you face, that complaining is justified given what you've endured. These are sophisticated lies that keep you imprisoned. Here is a truth that will serve you in every area of life. You are always choosing. Even when it feels like you have no choice, you are choosing how to interpret, how to respond, how to direct your attention and energy. The feeling of choicelessness is itself a choice, a surrender to circumstances or emotions. Reclaiming your power begins with recognizing that you are always, in every moment, choosing. When you recognize this, the enemies lose their primary weapon. They can no longer hide behind the illusion that your patterns are inevitable or beyond your control. Indifference is a choice. Indecision is a choice. Doubt is a choice. Worry is a choice. Overcaution is a choice. Pessimism is a choice. Complaining is a choice. You may not yet have mastered the ability to choose differently, but acknowledging that these are choices is the first step toward making different ones. The work ahead of you is not easy, but it is simple. Simple does not mean effortless. Simple means unambiguous. You know what needs to be done. When you notice indifference, choose engagement. When you notice indecision, choose commitment. When you notice doubt, choose evidence-based confidence. When you notice worry, choose present-focused action. When you notice overcaution, choose calculated risk. When you notice pessimism, choose flexible optimism. When you notice complaining, choose solution focus. Each time you make this choice, you strengthen the neural pathways associated with the new pattern. Each time you fail to make this choice, you strengthen the pathways associated with the old pattern. Your brain is being sculpted every day by your choices. The question is whether you're sculpting it deliberately toward your goals or allowing default patterns to sculpt it toward mediocrity. There is no neutral ground in this war. Every moment is either a victory or a defeat, a step toward the person you want to become, or a reinforcement of the person you've been. This might sound exhausting, and it is initially. But here's what happens over time. The new patterns become automatic. The energy required to act decisively decreases. The resistance to taking risks diminishes. The appeal of complaining fades. What once required intense effort becomes your natural way of being. This is the promise of neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to rewire itself based on repeated behavior. You are not stuck with the patterns you have now. You are not destined to struggle with these enemies forever. But the rewiring requires repetition, consistency, and time. There is no other way. As you begin this work, you will face a particular challenge, the gap between understanding and embodiment. You understand that worry is unproductive, yet you still worry. You understand that complaining achieves nothing, yet you still complain. This gap can be demoralizing if you interpret it as failure. It is not failure. It is the natural stage between intellectual knowledge and embodied wisdom. Close this gap through compassionate persistence. Notice the gap without judgment. I understand worry is unproductive, and I notice I'm still worrying. This is part of the learning process. Then redirect to the desired behavior. The gap will narrow gradually, almost imperceptibly at first. One day you'll realize that your default response has shifted, that the enemy's voice has grown quieter, that new patterns have become natural. You must also understand the concept of regression. There will be periods when old patterns surge back with intensity, particularly during stress or crisis. You will catch yourself complaining after weeks of solution-focused thinking. You will freeze in indecision after a string of decisive actions. These regressions are not evidence that you've failed or that change is impossible. They are a normal part of the process. When regression occurs, your response determines whether it becomes a temporary setback or a permanent return to old patterns. If you interpret regression as proof that you can't change, you'll abandon the effort. If you interpret it as expected turbulence on the path of growth, You'll simply redirect and continue. The latter interpretation is accurate. Change is not linear. It's 2 steps forward, 1 step back, gradually creating distance from who you were. Let's address a question you might be asking. What if I've struggled with these enemies for decades? What if these patterns are deeply ingrained? The answer is both sobering and hopeful. Yes, deeply ingrained patterns take longer to change. The neural pathways are well established, the behaviors are automatic, the identity has been built around them. But time is not the determining factor. Intensity and consistency are the determining factors. Someone can struggle with pessimism for 30 years and transform it in 6 months through dedicated, consistent practice. Someone else can struggle for 30 years and make no progress because their attempts are sporadic and half-hearted. What matters is not how long you've had the pattern, but how committed you are to changing it now. Age is not a limiting factor either. The myth that you can't teach an old dog new tricks is exactly that, a myth, at least when it comes to humans. Neuroplasticity continues throughout life. What does decline with age is the motivation to change, the willingness to endure discomfort, the belief that change is possible. But if you maintain these qualities, your brain will cooperate regardless of your age. Consider the practical reality of your daily life. You have approximately 16 waking hours each day. That's 16 hours of choices, of micro-battles against these enemies. You don't need to win every battle. Perfection is not the standard. Progress is the standard. If you win 60% of these micro-battles today, you've had a successful day. If you win 65% tomorrow, you're trending in the right direction. Track your progress honestly but compassionately. At the end of each day, briefly review. How many times did I notice an enemy and consciously choose a different response? How many times did I default to old patterns? What triggered the successes? What triggered the defaults? This reflection takes 5 minutes but provides invaluable data about your patterns and progress. Celebrate small victories. The day you made a decision quickly rather than agonizing for hours, the moment you caught yourself complaining and redirected to problem solving, the time you felt doubt but took action anyway. These moments are not trivial. They are evidence that change is occurring, that you are not the same person you were. Acknowledging these victories reinforces them and motivates continued effort. Simultaneously, be honest about defeats without drowning in them. The day you spent 2 hours worrying instead of acting. The conversation where you complained for 20 minutes straight. The opportunity you declined because overcaution convinced you the risk was too great. These defeats are also valuable. They show you where the enemies are strongest, where you need to focus additional attention. Let's talk about the social dimension of this work because it's rarely discussed but critically important. As you change, your relationships will respond. Some people in your life are invested in your old patterns. The friend who bonded with you over shared complaints may feel abandoned when you stop complaining. The family member who felt superior to your indecision may feel threatened by your new decisiveness. The colleague who shared your pessimism may feel judged by your optimism. This is uncomfortable but necessary. You cannot simultaneously transform yourself and maintain relationships that depend on your remaining unchanged. You have 3 options. Transform the relationship by modeling and inviting new patterns of interaction, accept that some relationships will diminish or end, or abandon your growth to preserve relationships. The third option is the one most people choose, and it's why most people never change. Choose the first option when possible. When the complaining friend starts down a familiar path, gently redirect. I hear that's frustrating. What do you think could help solve it? Model solution-focused thinking without preaching. Some people will follow your lead, curious about the shift they're noticing in you. These relationships will deepen and become more valuable. Accept the second option when necessary. Some people will not follow your lead. They'll resent your changes, explicitly or implicitly. They'll try to pull you back to old patterns through mockery, guilt, or manipulation. As painful as it is, you must create distance from these relationships. You're not abandoning them. You're choosing yourself, choosing growth, choosing the life you want over the comfort of familiar dysfunction. Never choose the third option. No relationship is worth sacrificing your growth. If someone requires you to remain limited as the price of their companionship, they don't actually care about you. They care about the function you serve in their life, and that function is making them feel better about their own limitations. This is not friendship. This is mutual imprisonment disguised as loyalty. As you change, new people will enter your life, people who operate from the patterns you're developing, people who are decisive, optimistic, action-oriented, solution-focused. These relationships will feel different, lighter, more energizing. They will accelerate your growth because you're no longer swimming upstream against the current of collective dysfunction. Seek these people intentionally. They exist everywhere, often invisible to those operating from old patterns, but obvious once you begin changing. Now let's address the deepest question. Why should you undertake this difficult work? What's the ultimate purpose? Because if your only goal is surface-level success, career advancement, or social approval, you will not sustain the effort required. These external markers are insufficient fuel for the internal transformation we're discussing. The ultimate purpose is freedom, not freedom from responsibility or consequences, but freedom to choose your response to life rather than being controlled by unconscious patterns. Freedom to pursue what matters to you without being paralyzed by internal enemies. Freedom to fail without being destroyed. Freedom to succeed without self-sabotage. Freedom to become the fullest expression of your potential, whatever that means for you. This freedom is not given. It's not a right you can claim. It's a capacity you must develop through exactly the kind of internal work we've been discussing. Every victory over indecision expands your freedom to commit. Every victory over worry expands your freedom to be present. Every victory over pessimism expands your freedom to see possibility. This accumulated freedom is what allows you to live a life of your own design, rather than defaulting to whatever life happens to you. Nietzsche spoke of the will to power, often misunderstood as the desire to dominate others. What he actually meant was the drive to overcome yourself, to master your internal chaos, to impose order and direction on the forces within you that would otherwise control you. This is the highest form of power, and it's available to everyone willing to engage in the struggle. You stand at a threshold. Behind you is the familiar territory of your enemies, the patterns that have limited you, the comfortable prison you've inhabited. It's known, predictable, safe in its way. Ahead is uncertain territory, the path of daily battles, gradual transformation, and the freedom that lies on the other side of your limitations. You cannot stand at this threshold forever. Refusing to choose is choosing the familiar, choosing the prison. Step forward. Not with dramatic gestures or grandiose declarations, but with one small, concrete action right now. Message the person you've been avoiding because of worry about their response. Make the decision you've been postponing because of indecision. Take the risk you've been calculating for months because of overcaution. Replace one complaint with one solution-focused statement. It doesn't matter which enemy you engage first. What matters is that you engage. This single action will not transform your life, but it will prove to yourself that transformation is possible, that you can choose differently, that the enemies are not invincible. That proof, small as it is, creates momentum. Tomorrow, you'll take another action, then another. These actions accumulate, compound, and over time create a life unrecognizable from the one you've been living. The 7 silent enemies of success are silenced precisely because most people never identify them, never acknowledge them, never fight them. They lose a war they didn't know they were in. You now have a tremendous advantage. You know the enemies. You know their tactics. You know the counter strategies. The only question is whether you'll use this knowledge. Years from now, you will look back at this moment. You will either see it as the turning point, the moment you decided to engage in the battle for your potential, or you will see it as another piece of interesting information you consumed and forgot. The difference between these two outcomes will not be dramatic. It will be the accumulation of choices made in moments just like this one, moments where action and inaction stand before you as equal possibilities. Choose action. Choose it again tomorrow. Choose it the day after. Keep choosing it until action becomes your nature, until these enemies are so weakened they can barely whisper, until the life you want is the life you're living. This is not guaranteed. Success is never guaranteed. But defeat is guaranteed if you don't fight. The only question is whether you'll give yourself a chance. The moment of decision is now, not after you think about it more, not after you feel more motivated, not after circumstances improve. Now. What will you do? The answer to that question will determine everything that follows. The war begins with a single battle. Fight it, win it, then fight the next one. This is the path. Walk it. Don't forget to give a like or a hype and subscribe to the channel. Watch the next video to complete everything you just learned.